evening. We are just letting some people in through the live stream, so have some patience, but very happy to be here. So we have Ravi Verma, hello, and we have Mike Torrence. You guys have an interesting relationship of how you met each other, which I really appreciate, but you do work with each other now at Org Whispers. For today's topic, we're going to be talking about 10 barriers to scaling Scrum and how to break them. What I think is really nice today about the pairing that you both have is Ravi's really experienced with scaling the theory, obviously working with different clients, but also Mike, you bring a lot of the, let's just say, practitioner experience, and you've been in fintech and some different industries. So I expect to see hello from England. I expect to see you chiming in with maybe some of the challenges that you faced and some of the tips that you might have for today. All right, so quick guidelines. Today we are going to, as usual, have your microphones muted, but we'll be watching for your questions. So there's a chat, of course, but put in your questions. We'll be taking them throughout. I'll be keeping an eye on them. The session is being recorded. Our colleague Lindsay will get this up on the Scrum.org website. She does that usually immediately after, but expect it at least within 24 hours. Again, ask questions and you'll see that little icon. All right, so who is Scrum.org? We'll do our quick intro. We are founded, I was just taken by Ken Schwaber's we are founded by Ken Schwaber, who is the co-founder of the Scrum framework, but he's also the founder of Scrum.org. Scrum.org is based on training, education, community, and that's what's marvelous about bringing webinars like this together, so we can work with each other and then also learn from you and your questions and address those. We're a mission-based company working to help people and teams solve complex problems. My name is Patricia Kong. I forgot to introduce myself. I've been at Scrum.org for a while and working with Ravi and people like Mike on things like enterprise solutions and different learning and content that we can bring to you, the community. So with all that done, again, make sure to put your questions in when you have them. I'll be watching them, and I'm going to kick it off to you, Mike, to introduce yourself, please.
Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Mike Torrence. I Navy veteran, and I transitioned into the telecom industry. And after a while of being a technical expert, I decided I wanted to go into project management. Had some people steer me towards agility and Scrum. And I was fortunate to come across Ravi, who has a nonprofit that helps military veterans, active military, and their spouses get free education, certification, and practical experience in agility and Scrum. So due to Ravi and another gentleman named Greg Gamal, their generosity, I was able to become a Scrum Master. I got my first gig. Fortunately, I got to work directly with Ravi. And so I've had mentorship going on for about 5 years. I've worked for a few different companies, primarily financial or consulting. And now I'm fortunate I get to work directly with Ravi again, helping clients find some solutions to their problems. So basically anything you see on this is due to the big hearts of Ravi and Greg and how they help military veterans. So I'm happy to be here, and it's an honor and a privilege to get to speak alongside Ravi.
Thank you, Mike, for your kind words. Thank you for your service. So my goal is to disrupt BS, baloney skittles in the name of Agile and Scrum. There's a lot of messages going on these days. Agile is dead, Scrum is dead. And I see a lot of messages about, Agile coaches like me focusing on things like how many angels can dance on a pinhead. So my goal is to remind people that the goal of Scrum or scaling frameworks is to help companies make money, save money, and reduce risk, or add value, decrease waste, and reduce risk. So I'm hoping that in today's conversation, I can give you some ways or to reframe your relationship with Scrum in the context of business outcomes. So Mike and I, we both work at Org Whisperers, and we help organizations apply Agile methods to build strong teams and inspiring leaders at all levels. The reason that I met Mike was through Agile for Patriots. This is our nonprofit. We give back to our military families, no matter which country you might be in. My request to you is military families sacrifice a lot. So all families in the country live free and safe. So please find a way to thank a military family. Do whatever you can to support them because they do so much to support us. If you're interested in supporting military families in America, then consider our nonprofit Agile for Patriots. So what is the goal of today's session? If we were to begin with the end in mind, our goal, Mike and I, we want to share from our lived experience. We have helped companies scale Scrum from 5 teams to 500 teams and everything in between. So we are going to draw upon our lived experience on what has worked and what has not worked. And we'll tell you what are the 10 barriers we seem to find over and over again, no matter what industry, no matter what tech stack, no matter what country the client is located in. And based on all of our failures, the school of hard knocks, we are going to share certain barrier busters or complementary practices or frameworks that have helped clients overcome these barriers. And then we'll give you some resources. So what? Our goal is after you watch this webinar, you have more information to make an informed choice. You may say, yeah, you know what, this scaling thing, it's not for me. I don't want to scale, which is a valid choice. Or you may say, you know what, I want to get better at atomic single team Scrum before I try to scale Scrum. Or you might say, you know what, I don't want to launch a whole new framework. I want to steal some practices, scaling practices, and gently introduce it. And I want to ease into a scaling framework. Some of you might say, no, I want to do a quick launch. I want to install a framework or start a framework. And some of you might say, look, we already launched a scaling framework. We want to reboot it. Okay. So our goal is that this webinar will give you information so you can make the best choice for your unique context. Ultimately, the goal of Scrum or scaling is not Scrum or scaling. The goal is to create a sustainable, viable business. So I remember when I attended my PSM1 training with Ken Schwaber, throughout the 2 days, Ken would repeat 3 things over and over again. The goal of Scrum is to increase value. If you're a for-profit, typically it's make money, decrease waste. There's a typo there. Decrease waste, save money, or decrease risk. So my hope is that as Mike and I introduce ideas, that you will look at these ideas through the lens of your context and ask yourself, how might this idea help us increase value, decrease waste, manage risk, or make money, save money, reduce risk? Okay, so keep that in mind. So what is the inspiration? What are the ingredients for what we are sharing? 2 ingredients from Scrum.org. The ideas here mimic the flow of a Scrum.org APS, Applying Professional Scrum class, which is single team Scrum, and a mimic scale professional Scrum. And what I noticed is whenever a client hires us, Mike and me, typically some clients will say, hey, help us launch a Scrum team, or help us launch a Nexus, or launch a scaled Scrum initiative, team of teams. And based on these experiences and these inspiration, which is Scrum.org courseware and our client engagements, we have derived the 10 ideas we're going to share here. So what are the top 10 barriers? What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly run through these 10 barriers, and I'll ask you some questions, and then I will ask Mike to complement me and support me by giving examples from his experience as a Scrum Master about these barriers. What's the first barrier? The first barrier to scaling is an unclear purpose. I just had a client, and when the CTO hired me, I said, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And he says, I want to get stuff done. He didn't use the word stuff, but I don't want to use the word that he used. I'll get in trouble with Lindsay. That is such an output-based perspective. I just want to get more output. And that was confusing the heck out of people, because what output do you want? Everybody had a different perspective about what are we trying to build. If you're trying to get more stuff done, for example, if you're BlackBerry, you try to build more BlackBerries, fine, you can optimize the heck out of your company. You can get thousands of BlackBerries, but what's the point if people are not buying BlackBerries, they're buying iPhones? So this is one of the barriers for scaling Scrum. People don't know, what are you trying to achieve? What's the business outcome? The second is a framework, misfit framework. Some people say, I want a framework that answers every single question that people could come up with. And maybe for their cultural context, they want a heavyweight framework, which is very prescriptive. Some people say, no, give me the autonomy to figure out what is appropriate in my context. So they want a lightweight framework. I remember working for a company as a scaling coach, which had 500 Scrum teams. People in America probably know the name of the company. It's in fintech. And there was such a divergence between people who wanted every question to be answered and didn't want to have to think too much about what do I do. And there were some people who said, no, give me as much autonomy as possible. So the second barrier to scaling is figuring out, for my cultural context, what is the right amount of prescriptiveness? What's the right framework? Do I want a descriptive framework or do I want a prescriptive framework? The third is unhelpful product definition. Especially when I work with companies that have grown through acquisition, what happens is they have a lot of small itty-bitty products. They acquired a lot of mom and pop companies, and now they are trying to create a platform or a larger product which appeals to a more diverse set of customers. The problem is the granularity of their product is so small, you can't scale. Because when you try to optimize at the product level, an unhelpful product definition will cause you to sub-optimize at the systemic level. So you've got to figure out what's the right granularity of product definition if you want to scale. The fourth is a disempowered product owner. So usually what will happen is when I go into a company, you may have 10 product owners for itty-bitty products, one person Scrum team, which I know it sounds ridiculous, but I've had situations where there's a one-person Scrum team with one product owner. When we go into scaling, we recommend that for scaling, if you want to scale Scrum, there's still one product backlog and there is one product owner. Now, this becomes a political challenge for the company because if there are 10 product owners of one-person Scrum teams, 9 of them will have to get the news, potentially 10. Hey, you know what? You're not a product owner anymore. How do you deliver that message in a way that does not demoralize that person and still gives them a dignity, a sense of dignity and purpose? That can be challenging. So what most people do is they avoid this hard conversation and say, yeah, we're going to scale, but we're going to have 10 product owners. That's a barrier. The product backlog is usually a hodgepodge wish list. Like there are drive-bys. Any salesperson, CEO, anyone in the C-suite, the nephew of the board of directors, someone, everybody and their brother has an idea of what we should be working on. And it's completely incoherent. If you look at your product backlog, it's not rolling up to a clear, unifying true north. That's another barrier to scaling. Because now every team is going to be working towards a different direction, a different purpose. The biggest killer of scaling, which is what we teach in Nexus, in our Scale Professional Scrum, is dependencies. When you have 3 to 5 teams or 10 teams or 100 teams trying to create one coherent, unified product or platform, where value goes to die is the dependencies between teams. Everybody has got local goals and they're trying to do local optimization. And because these dependencies are not being managed, it causes global systemic sub-optimization. So these dependencies paralyze people. People don't have clarity. What is my job? Should I just focus on my code? Should I focus on my PBI? Should I focus on my team's goal? Or should I focus on the goal of my team of teams? What is my accountability? And if there's too many things to be, if there are too many things to be done, if I'm getting pulled in too many directions, how do I decide what I should focus on? Because if everything is important, nothing is important. Finally, cultures. When we introduce single team Scrum, what we try to help people do is they each have their personal values. And when they are trying to figure out how do I behave, how do I solve this problem, their criteria is, how would Ravi do it? How would Mike do it? When we introduce single team Scrum, we try to elevate their thinking to say, no, how would our team do it? What are our shared norms? Now, sometimes this success can be a failure at the scale Scrum context because now we have helped teams create their identity and they become attached to their identity. Now, when you try to help multiple teams with very well-defined identities, team norms, working agreements, try to work together, there is a clash of cultures because what might be the right way to do in Mike's team may be different from Trish's team, may be different from Ravi's team or Lindsay's team. When all 4 of our teams have to work together, we have to sacrifice and we have to give up some of our habits and norms and preferences at the team level for the greater good, which is now at the nexus level or the team of teams level. So misaligned cultures is a barrier. Death by integration. So Mike and I, we worked in clients where each team is going really fast, developing a lot of features, but they are sitting in some UAT environment or their local team environment. And we've been in companies where there is 6 to 12 months of unintegrated code. Just imagine if there are 50 people who worked for 12 months and delivered 12 months of unintegrated code. What an absolute nightmare it is to integrate 50 months, person years worth of code in a big bang integration. This is one of the biggest barriers to scaling because we don't integrate often enough. We postpone integration towards the end, and then you can spend months in integration, which delays time to market. And finally, forecasting. Each team may have their own forecasting method. Some people are using velocity, some are using absolute hours, some are using story points, flow metrics. When you try to get 3, 10, 100 teams to work together, how do you create a coherent, unified, consistent forecasting approach that can help us forecast at a team of teams level, at the scale level? Okay. All right. So those are my thoughts on our lived experience, the top 10 killers of scaling, barriers of scaling. I would love to ask you, just to get a feeling for kind of the pulse of the room, which is the biggest, single most biggest barrier to scaling that you are facing in your context? So if you can, Lindsay has launched a poll. Please take a moment and tell us the biggest barrier your organization is facing right now. And while you're doing that,
All of the above.
all of the above. Pick one. If you had to improve in one area tomorrow as a result of this webinar, where would you focus? And while we are waiting for the results of the poll to come in, Trish, what are you noticing? Which of these, as you go out in the industry, talk to different companies, which of these have you found to be the biggest challenge?
I think the biggest takeaway for me, and I'm sure you guys will talk about this, but it's really not just about scaling. For me, it's like, what is the biggest barrier to business agility, which is a lot of what I think about. But I would have to say that when we put together the Nexus framework, it was really about managing those dependencies. And then I would say second, it's about understanding what the purpose is of what we're doing. So
yeah,
which really drives product definition and all those other things.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this. We have some results.
So Lindsay, whenever you're ready, you can let us know. You can close the poll and then we can move forward.
Okay, the results are up.
Oh, results are out. Okay, so the results are, and Lindsay, are people able to see these results?
Yes, everyone should be able to see them. Trish can
All
see
right.
them. She just said that she saw them.
Perfect.
You can see them. I guess Ravi can't see them. So number one, 31% paralyzing dependencies. For those who aren't watching the screen, and it looks like 16% is unclear purpose. So that's second. And the lowest one is interesting. It is unhelpful product definition, which that is interesting to me because every time I've worked into a consulting engagement about scaling, it's usually about, but what actually is the product?
What is the
Is
product?
the product the platform, or is the product the product? So that's interesting.
That's interesting. All right. Okay, so let's move on, if I can. So one question that I would like to ask you, and for this is left as an exercise to the viewer. We shared 10 barriers that Mike and I have observed organizations facing as they travel on the path to scaling. Which of these do you feel is not applicable to single team Scrum? If anyone has a quick reaction, I would love to get that. So if you have an answer to this question, type it in the chat window. I'm monitoring it and I'm getting some answers. So some people are. So there's one answer, which is number 7, overlapping accountabilities is not a barrier for single team. And one person saying, it's a trick question. They all apply to single team Scrum. Maybe 6, if there is a properly built single team, single team Scrum. Okay, 9, overlapping accountabilities. So I want to leave this as a question. Why did we inject this? As you know, as we were preparing for this, Mike made a comment. Ravi, I think there are only 2 things that don't apply to single team Scrum. My hope is that you will reflect on this question and figure out which of the barriers or principles and values differentiate single team Scrum versus scale Scrum. At Scrum.org, we often say scale Scrum is still Scrum. So the fundamentals, principles, values, practices of atomic Scrum still apply, and resist the temptation of mangling the fundamentals of single team Scrum as a way to, or using scaling as a way to justify violating the principles and values of single team Scrum. So think about this, and I hope you will discuss this in your team context. So we spoke about the barriers, but actually before we go to the barrier busters, maybe I should ask Mike. Mike, do you are there any examples that you can share from your lived experience as a Scrum Master that might bring these to life for our audience?
Actually, I was just thinking, and I did say to you, I had a misunderstanding on one of them earlier when we were speaking, but now I actually think there are none. I think 0. I'm not going to help anyone cheat, but I think these apply to both.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen examples of all of these as we'll talk further down the road here, but yeah, I think not knowing why, not starting with why, that's huge. So, if you don't even know why and you can't really identify your problem, then scaling it, you're just going to scale your problems.
Yeah.
So this isn't, Scrum's not the silver bullet, nor is scaling Scrum if you haven't mastered single Scrum before trying to scale it.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So now let's talk about barrier busters. So if you ask your team members, hey, what are we doing? Tell me, what are you working on today? And how is that task related to the company's measurable financial goal this year? And how is it related to the company's mission and vision? And if you get answers like, I don't know, or if you get 20 different answers from 20 different people who are part of the scale Scrum team of teams, that could be a smell or a symptom that there is an unclear purpose. So what practices can you use? Some practices apply to single team Scrum as well. Create a unifying product vision, create a product goal, create a balanced, measurable product scoreboard, which gives you empirical evidence of the efficacy of your solution. A good product scoreboard, in my mind, would have business outcome or impact-based metrics, like what is your average recurring revenue? What is your EBITDA or profit? What is your customer churn, customer net promoter score? These are outcome-based metrics. These are not activity-based metrics like what is your velocity. You may have leading indicators, like you may have throughput, you may have defects, but ultimately your scoreboard must have business outcome-based indicators, which your investors and board of directors care about. One technique that you might use, a complementary framework could be evidence-based management. The new EBM guide was just recently released. So if you want to figure out what kind of metrics or indicators you can consider as you create your product goal or a scoreboard, I would recommend you look at the latest EBM guide. Misfit framework. How do you choose a framework which has just the right amount of prescription or description that your teams are willing to adopt. This is something that you will have to find by talking to people, and you have to figure out what is the right amount of autonomy. I have seen frameworks which are so heavyweight that the solution becomes worse than the problem. I've tried to introduce single team Scrum, which is so simple to companies, and it takes forever to get psychological, emotional buy-in from people, even for simple things like a daily Scrum. It's a 15-minute event. Hey, let's just talk to each other. What did we do? What are we going to do? And what might get in the way? When you have so many challenges trying to get people to adopt single team Scrum, just imagine how many challenges you are going to find if you have a very complex framework with lots of little pictures and icons. Not that easy. So you'll have to figure out what's the right framework, because adopting a complex framework is not easy. Conversely, if it's too simple and your teams are unable to figure out answers by themselves, maybe that's not right for you as well. So you got to figure out what's the right framework for my context.
Ravi,
Yes.
in this conversation, would it be helpful for Mike to give some of the examples of what he's seen, or would you like to go through all 10 points?
That's a good point. I would love, so I am going off script. I forgot what we agreed to. So Mike, please stop and interject your observations along the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I go back,
I would actually love Mike to hear about the even just the beginning, the unclear purpose, just because so many people, that was the second one that people said, hey, this is what's a barrier for us.
yeah, for the unclear purpose, I've seen in multiple places where the product owner doesn't necessarily mention the product vision beyond, at a best case scenario, maybe we have quarterly planning for BRP, and you might mention it there, but then when you're coming to sprint reviews and you're talking to stakeholders, there's no tie-in. Like, how did this work tie into our product vision and our product goal? Our scoreboard's very, very much output based. Like, here's where we need to go to meet our goal. What was the percentage of the velocity you needed to hit? Where are we based on that? When you drive that, I just, people don't know why they're doing what they're doing. Secondarily, I think you lose a little motivation. Like, who just wants to work to hit a velocity? But having the scoreboard, I think also helps you. I think it helps you stay in sync with your customer. Like, are we building what is going to solve a customer problem, or are we just doing work to meet our vision, but we have no idea if we're helping our customer? Are we actually releasing to them so they can use this product in increments and then give us feedback if we're on the right track? So I think if you lose these things, you kind of confuse your own internal employees, but you could go way off course, not even knowing if what you're doing is helping your customer.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because if we think about, let's just say the purpose of a team is to create a valuable product increment or a valuable product, right? And we're looking at that. And so you guys poked me by talking about scoreboard. So I think it's really important to talk about, business impact and what that means to the business, but also just what you were talking about, Mike, was in terms of like, well, it's bringing us back to what the customer wants. But for me, that measurement that's really important is, we're running this experiment. How will we know that we're moving in the right direction? And there's examples of scoreboard somebody's asking, Ravi, in a lot of your content, but also, I just happen to have this handy in the EBM book. We have some examples of scoreboards and templates and what you could be using that would be a more outcome-based dashboard. So I think that that's great for a scoreboard. And really just to have some transparent artifact to have a discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have a couple of other examples. So a few years ago, we did a Scrum Pulse webinar like this one with Don McGrail. It's called Agile Metrics. So as part of that webinar, Don illustrated a scoreboard. So watch that webinar. On my YouTube channel, I have maybe a 5 or 6 minute video where I use an imaginary company like DoorDash, and I propose a sample scoreboard. So you could look at my YouTube channel for Org Whisperers. And this has been the single biggest challenge in every company I have worked in, which is there is no scoreboard. So I have created a product called Al Dente, which is right now in alpha level, which actually helps you create a scoreboard in 5 minutes. So if you are interested, contact me or connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can give you more resources. Okay, great questions. Mike, any other examples you want to share before we move on? And please, I apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
Interrupt me as often as needed. I forget when I go and get in the flow of things.
Yeah, I think misfit framework, you have to, I think you need to pay attention to when you might need to scale, but you also need to decide why you're trying to scale. I've seen some practices of scaling implemented for teams that didn't need to scale, and whereas maybe it can be a good magnifying glass for leadership to see what you're committing to for your quarter or something like that. I don't really think, I didn't feel that was necessary. I didn't really like the word commit versus forecast, but that's another soapbox for another day. I've seen teams that needed to scale and they were reluctant to do it. So I think you should look at why you're trying to scale. I think you should see which scaling framework fits your needs. And then hopefully you've mastered single Scrum before you try to scale it out.
Yeah.
And then, product definition, it was newer in some of the institutions that I worked in for the product goal to come out, but the product definition should have already been there. And again, I think if you don't constantly connect to that in your works and your sprints, I think if you don't have that product definition that's clearly stated and understood by everybody, then you kind of get lost again in why are we doing this?
Yeah. And there's a question: what is single team Scrum or single Scrum? When I talk about single team Scrum, it means get the fundamentals of professional Scrum effective at the single team level before you try to implement a scaling framework which helps multiple Scrum teams work together. Okay. I want to share a embarrassing personal failure, one of many. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So when I was an enterprise agile coach for a 10,000 person company, 5,000 people in IT, 350 agile teams. And the mistake I made was I tried to impose a consistent framework on everybody. And there was a rebellion because people's need for self-determination got violated. So they're like, who the hell are you as an enterprise coach trying to tell me how we should run our team? And the biggest insight I got from that massive failure was the goal should be business outcomes. So if I have a scoreboard, if I have an outcome, if I could get in a time machine and go back to being an enterprise agile coach for that company, what I would say is, look, here are the non-negotiable outcomes for the company. If you cannot find it in your heart to sign up for these or to support these, then maybe this is not the right company. There's the exit door. But assuming that you can be inspired and committed towards the mission, vision, values, and goals of the company, then you have the autonomy to choose the framework or the approach you want. What's non-negotiable are the outcomes, and we're going to check in, let's say every 2 weeks. As long as you're achieving the outcomes without violating the mission, vision, values of the company, use whatever framework you want. And this also ties back, number 1 and 2 are interrelated, because if I have clarity from the C-suite about the outcomes and a cadence of inspection, then I can safely decentralize decision-making about the framework that teams use, because as long as they're achieving the business outcomes, who cares what framework they're using? So that said, let me move on. How do you avoid a disempowered product owner? Like, how do you avoid a situation where there are 10 product owners and each is optimizing for their local product context and sub-optimizing at the global? The C-suite needs to have the courage to ruffle some feathers, because it's possible 9 of those 10 people who used to be product owners, they're not going to be product owners. And the C-suite also needs to have the compassion and the soft skills to still give dignity and purpose to the people who may not be product owners, so they don't feel that I just got a demotion. And this is the hard part. This is the hard part of being a leader. And many people in tech don't want to have these conversations. So they sweep it under the carpet. And they want to have 10 product owners. But guess what? If you have 10 product owners and you're trying to scale Scrum, it may not work because each of those 10 products may be product owners may be optimizing for a different goal.
And
Mike?
I've also seen slight angles too of a disempowered product owner where it's more or less just following orders from the C-suite, where especially maybe in a larger organization, they sort of have that vision roll down with the work that needs to be done. So they're more or less just managing that work as opposed to maybe having the courage to step up and say, hey, let's go test the market. Hey, I've got this idea. Can I try this out? They don't challenge status quo. They just do what they're told. And that it can be okay, I guess, if you're meeting the goals that the company has. But as far as actually going out and checking with your customer and touching base and making sure you're doing the experiments and going in the right direction, I think that's a little harmful if the product owner is just a proxy.
Yeah. We have seen situations where the product owner is nothing but a glorified typist, and the real decision is being taken at the C-suite level. So one of the videos that I shot, because I saw this so often, and I have a video on my YouTube channel, suggests that either you elevate product ownership. So if the real product owner is at the C-suite and they are like a puppet master who's telling the named product owner, who's nothing but a glorified typist, one option is, hey, C-suite person, chief product officer, please be the product owner. So either you elevate product ownership or you delegate power to the product owner, the named product owner, but don't use a hodgepodge. Pick one. And if you choose to attend the SPS workshop, we can give you techniques on how someone at the C-suite level who has a busy calendar can still be an effective product owner without their calendar getting sucked up in a lot of meetings. So there are ways to do it, but you got to have the guts to do it. The next barrier buster that we would recommend is having a outcome-centric product backlog. So this is something that I learned in the Scrum.org Scale Professional class. There is a complementary practice called impact mapping. So if you look at impact mapping, it is a complementary practice that will help you associate every single product backlog item back to a problem that a customer or a user is trying to solve. So you can, one thing I learned from Trish was, you can use impact mapping to create a product backlog from a blank canvas where you can go left to right. You start with maybe some business goals. You go to your customers and user personas. What are the customer and user persona goals? And then you back into your PBIs. Or if you have a pre-existing product backlog, you can go right to left. And if you find items which cannot be traced back to a customer user persona or their goals or business goals, you must ask a question. Should I kill this PBI, or have I just stumbled upon an unaddressed business need or a persona need? But at any point in time, your PBIs should be traced back to your true north, and people should be able to articulate it. And if not, you may want to consider complementary practices like impact mapping. Trish, Mike, anything you want to add? If you do, just stop me. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one.
I think there is a lot of correlation between when you're thinking about, when you're thinking about incoherent product backlog between number 1, number 3, number 4, and number 5. Like it trickles down from that point, because when you're talking about an agile organization, doesn't matter if you're using one team, several teams, but if you are within a traditional organization and you are using traditional methods and you are looking at phase gating and you are someone's talking about waterfall, then you are not going to be able to work in an agile fashion. And so all these other things is just kind of like, it's the same way as working in waterfall. You're not able to empower a team. You're not empowering product ownership. You're not bringing on that value faster and reducing risk. So just the correlation between all these things is very, very powerful. There was a question that someone asked in terms of misfit framework. Sorry to pull us back. So Mark Atwood is saying, Ravi, you commented that as long as the team is meeting outcomes, the framework doesn't matter, which means it would be fine if the team wanted to work in waterfall.
I don't care. I'm not opposed to waterfall. Why does a business Why does a business exist? So I've got some hats here. A business exists to achieve some business outcomes. What are the business outcomes? Make money, save money, reduce risk. If you can achieve it using waterfall, I don't care. I'm not here like a snake oil salesman trying to push Scrum on everyone. I want my clients to thrive in a way that is consistent with their mission, vision, and values. As long as my clients are thriving, I don't care what framework they use. Now, if they ask me,
say it is very hard to thrive building certain things in waterfall.
yeah. So for me, my question is, when you are trying to answer or evaluate options, hey, should I use waterfall? Should I use XYZ? Instead of me giving you the answer, I want to use a technique I learned from Ken Schwaber. And he said, Ravi, don't talk about in the PSM1 class. Ravi, don't talk about good or bad. Let's talk about effective versus ineffective. Let's talk about consistent versus inconsistent. Which path might be consistent with the business outcomes? Make money, save money, reduce risk. Which of these options might be most consistent with serving customers and users? Which of these options is most consistent with our investor goals? Instead of me giving you a solution, I would rather give you a decision-making framework that is grounded in business outcomes. So that's how I would recommend. The only suggestion I would give is have a cadence of accountability every 2 weeks, because then you get 26 opportunities to course correct in a year. So my advice is every 2 weeks, we're going to get together. We're going to show the scoreboard of lead and lag indicators so we don't get blindsided on December 31st when the game is over. As long as we are making incremental progress towards our goals, have fun. Those are the two criteria: value and values. Value is business goals. Values is our culture. As long as you are honoring these two, have fun. All right. Doing a quick time check. We have just a few minutes. So I'm going to see if I can zoom through some of these. Paralyzing dependencies. So I'll tell you a real world story. I had a client where the UI team was in West Coast. Middleware team is sitting in, let's say, Dallas. QA team is sitting in Asia. And then there is some other team, development team, also sitting in another country in Asia. What's the problem? Each of these are different vendors who are competing for business. Guess what? They could not get an increment delivered in a sprint because each team is actually a component team. So here's a client who says, man, my team is the CEO of the company is telling me, man, these IT people, they're not reliable. They don't do anything they're supposed to do. When they finally do it, it sucks. Quality is terrible. The features don't deliver value. But when I offer to the CTO, the problem is you have component-based teams from different vendors who hate each other. Can we create autonomous cross-functional teams? The answer is no, not going to do it. So you may want to, before you launch a scaling framework, you may want to check in with your C-suite and try to explain to them how their current decisions may be inconsistent with their investor goals, customer goals. But if they are not able to influence them, it may not be appropriate to go to a scaling framework where you have these component teams distributed throughout the world.
And following up on something that I thought to mention earlier, but Trisha already mentioned it, is like a lot of these things bleed over to each other. So when I think of paralyzing dependencies, I also have seen some examples where it hits number 8. We haven't gotten there yet, but misaligned culture. I've seen when we have successfully set up some dependency management or opportunities to work together, you might look good in the moment in the meeting, but then when it's time to actually work together behind the scenes, the culture killer is someone doesn't want to work with other people or can't handle pressure and bites people's heads off or literally goes and hides in a conference room where no one can find the person. And so you have to manage dependencies across teams and you have to work together. It's always a consistent work. It's not always your one event or one meeting where you touch base and then you let it go. You consistently work together for your organizational goals. And if sometimes if you have the misaligned cultures, you're gonna have maybe a culture killer in there that's just as bad as someone who doesn't know what he or she's doing.
Yeah, that was a very specific example, Mike, of someone going to hide in the it sounds like personal experience. And I would say it's not all or nothing. So one of the ways when we're working on this, right, because culture is kind of like an outcome, but is to make those dependencies transparent. So I was recently asked about something about like, what does this mean, this initiative, and what's the time to market? Well, one of the things is we have to understand capacity. So if you just make that regularly consistent, we're always dependent on this, doesn't mean it solves it. So then at some point we can see this is a trend and how do we move it, right? So it's about bringing that up so we can have that conversation rather than it being all or nothing.
Yeah.
Next one, Ravi.
Next one is accountabilities. So there are situations where there are overlapping accountabilities, and there are situations where they are neglected or orphan accountabilities. I want to introduce something I learned in ORSC team coaching. So I'm trying to be a better team coach. I want to suck at the next higher level. I'll always be sucking. One of the tools that I learned in ORSC coaching is that roles belong to the system. So you may have a company or an organization where there are some people who will check in their code, and their definition of their role or their accountabilities. I checked in my code, it's compiling. See you suckers, I'm off for the weekend. And now there's somebody else who has to pick up the pieces when the build breaks or maybe when it's not integrating. And there are some other people who are always trying to figure out when there is a regression issue or an integration issue. How do we make this work? Over time, they get role nausea. Hey, why is it that I am the only person who's staying up late, missing my kids' ballet recital, trying to make this build work? Why does nobody else do it? So if you don't have a shared understanding of who is accountable for what, when, you could have certain accountabilities which are not fulfilled, or you could have certain accountabilities which are always fulfilled by the same people who get so exhausted and nauseated that they will either check out, or they will check out and leave, or they will check out and stay. So it's so important to have role clarity and accountability clarity.
And I also think there's a segment where there are accountabilities that shouldn't be there that are present, and when they are, they can actually go in submarine the proper efforts of the roles and accountabilities that should be there. So you have to be careful with that, because if it's a pull-based system, you can have people come in and turn it into a push-based system, and that has so many negative connotations and results that can take place.
Yeah.
I wanted to pull in this question if we could, because it's a nice thing about accountability, who's responsible if nobody is, and also just commitment and interest. So the question is, when the topic of definition of done comes up during internal team discussions, there's no one that's interested to take that up along with the developers across multiple teams. So now we're talking about multiple teams working together. What is that definition of done? They don't care. They're just saying, let's work on acceptance criteria only. So besides, we know that that's, maybe a little bit risky. Well, how would you advise someone to handle this scenario based on what you've seen?
Yeah, and that segues into the next, which is the misaligned cultures. What I have learned from my ORSC team coaching is that we do something known as a design team alliance, or a working agreement among the team. So I see a long list in the Q&A session, Q&A panel about the challenges people are facing. The best way to do this is to use the approach that Ken Schwaber says, which is ask the team. When I am designing the team alliance as a skilled facilitator, I would ask the team first, how do you feel about having a customer and user-centric view of working together? How do you feel about framing success in terms of what's best for customers and users? And see if we have alignment. If we don't have an alignment, address that. How do you feel about framing success in terms of investors? Do we have alignment? If we don't, let's address it. Assuming that we have framed success in terms of what's best for customers and users and investors, now you can articulate what's going on, and you can say, hey, you know what? I'm noticing something. We say that we want to do what's best for customers and users and investors, but when it comes to the topic of quality and definition of done, nobody wants to talk about it. This is what I'm noticing. What are you noticing? How is this affecting customers? How is this affecting investors? What do you want to do? Do you want to change your goals, or do you want to change your behavior? Pick one, but be consistent. That's what I would recommend. Ask the team. Trish, any follow-ups on that answer before I move on?
No, I think that's a good one. I was wondering, Mike, if you had anything you want to contribute. If not, we can go on to integration.
Uh, I think you answered it well for DoD, but I still love working agreements, and it's not just for your team. I'll tell you from personal experience, when you use working agreements with other teams, with C-suite, with infrastructure, SecOps, DBAs, you would be amazed when you actually get in alignment with these other teams. Those nightmare interactions where you really maybe need something, and there were maybe some promises made, but when you come to that person, you can actually, I think it diffuses situations. I think it gives like a social lubrication to, hey, we agreed on this, I'm just following what you said I could do. I've seen some amazing transformations from hostility to really flowing the work and being able to get the assistance you need. So working agreement is not just for your team. I think it works in a lot of contexts.
Yeah. I think the three most important words that I would ask you to remember is what Ken Schwaber often tells us. Ask the team. Don't try to make a mistake, which I made, which was to try and be a knight in shining armor and try to rescue and protect the team and to fix problems, because that could be a sign of monumental arrogance. Who the heck do I think I am that I feel that I have a better solution than the wisdom of my team? Most of the time, I don't. Ask the team first. Death by integration. So I remember attending the Scale Professional Scrum class with Ken, and one of the statements he made is, no one should be able to go home at the end of the day if the code is not integrated. Now, and I still think that makes sense, because the more inventory you have, unintegrated code, the bigger is the risk that when you try to do a big bang integration, it's not going to work, which will stop you from making money, saving money, reducing risk. So have your scale definition of done include integration. And I worked in a company where they had 6 to 12 months of unintegrated code, and the CIO of the company says imposed WIP limits. If you have more than 1 month of unintegrated code, you cannot work on any new feature. You gotta integrate code first. And that changed the behavior of the company, because the CIOs started measuring it, and we created a scoreboard which showed how many story points worth of unintegrated code is there. And the moment it reached 2 months, he said, stop all new feature development, integrate what you already developed. Mike, anything you want to add?
We're probably thinking of the same engagement, but yeah, it's we preferred obviously releases to the customer, but even if it was going to go dark, if you have something that's backed up for most of a year in your QA environment, and you're just sitting there waiting, now you don't know what's expired, what kind of what's going to happen that doesn't work anymore. And that's exactly what happened is we had that opportunity, like, hey, stop starting and start finishing, put this in production, even if it's dark, get it there, test it out, make sure it works. Let's reduce this risk. So it was
starting, start finishing. Stop starting, start finishing. And the last one, unreliable forecasting. So in Scale Professional Scrum, I learned the technique of the cross-team refinement, where we try to create alignment between the different Scrum teams in terms of a 3-sprint forecast of what is likely to be worked on and which team is likely to work on it. So that is a complementary practice you may consider. And then we would recommend using flow metrics for forecasting as opposed to velocity and story points. So I'm doing a quick time check. So that brings us to the end of our 10 barriers and 10 barrier busters. When we upload the slides, the PDF version of the slides to the webinar page, you'll have some resources on getting better at single team Scrum, and then some resources on getting better at scale Scrum. And just to recap, my hope is that you look at the content we shared today from the lens of business outcomes. Which idea might help us make money, save money, and reduce risk? So if you want to contact us, Mike and me, find us on LinkedIn. You can go to our website. We have tons of content based on what clients and webinars our attendees have asked us most often. You can connect, follow our company page on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and join our meetup. You'll find all these links on our webpage. And I think there's tons of content on the Scrum.org website. One of the things that inspires me about Scrum.org is that we give you free, curated, high quality content that you don't have to pay for. Our goal is truly to help you learn. So this is not behind a paywall. So my request is consider the Scrum.org content and connect with us. Closing thoughts, Trish, anything you want to add as we start wrapping up?
This might be a broad, so just looking at the chat and the questions from both of you. So you both worked in small, large companies and across different frameworks. They're just a broad comment because from either of you or from both of you is that it looks like a lot of people are still struggling through not what is the perfect framework, but I am swimming in, we're either using SAFe, or we're using Waterfall, or we're using parts of this, What is some guiding advice that you would have for someone who's like, we're kind of in this, this haystack and we're trying to figure out how to make a little bit of progress? What would you suggest?
My suggestion is 3 questions. What do I want? That is in terms of business outcome. What am I getting? And how's it working out for me? What do I want? What do I have? What do I want to do? How's it working out? So our industry has a terrible reputation because we talk about nonsense like scaling frameworks. Who cares about the scaling framework? Think like an investor. Think like a customer. What do I want, which is the outcome and the scoreboard? What am I getting? Again, look at the scoreboard. Empiricism is about comparing the delta between what I want and what I'm getting and unpacking the delta for wisdom. That's inspection and adapting. Transparency, inspection, adaptation. What do I want? What am I getting? How do I get better? What do I want? What am I getting? How do I get better? You do those 3 things, you'll be fine.
And Mike, what about you?
Yeah, I think there are questions you can ask yourself as far as if you're intent on using a framework, like, am I using the same product? Are we working on the same product? Are we working on a different product? That can pretty easily help steer you a bit. I like what Ravi was saying, where I was going to go with that is sort of the PDCA, plan, do, check, act. You have to have constant inspection. You have to constantly know if you're going the right direction. You might not even need an actual new framework. It could just be, can you use scaling practices? Are you going to manage your dependencies? Are you going to work well with other teams? Are you all going to be able to meet the same definition of done? Can you help the customer jointly? There's just lots of things that you could consider, but ultimately, I think it's what Ravi said.
Well, on that note, it's what Ravi said. Thank you very much, both of you, to Ravi, to Mike, and to everyone listening. So this will be posted. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Ravi and Mike, and especially all your harder questions. Give them to Ravi. He'll enjoy in that. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for attending. And for some of these questions that we didn't get to, Ravi and Mike will get them, and they'll figure out how to address those.
Thank you. Ask the team. Ask the team.